Isabella walked hurriedly through the halls of the mansion, holding her suitcase tightly. His footsteps echoed on the cold floor, and his rapid breathing revealed his restlessness. The silence in the room made everything seem even heavier. The house that for months had been the scene of intense competition now seemed empty, without voices, without movement. The glow of the chandeliers reflected on the impeccable walls. But for her, that mansion was nothing more than a labyrinth that she needed to get out of as quickly as possible. There was no longer any reason to stay. The game was over, and she failed. The prize was not for those who stayed until the end, but for those who knew how to play. The exit was in front of him. The big door seemed far away, but it was the only thing that mattered. Each step taken towards freedom seemed to ease the weight I carried a little. She wanted to forget those months. The disputes, the competitive looks, the tests that never made sense. I wanted to leave behind everything that experience represented. Before she could touch the handle of the large door, a sound behind her made her stop. He turned around at the same moment and found Leonard, who quickly got in front of him, blocking his exit. He was positioned in the middle of the way, an obstacle she couldn't ignore. He didn't seem angry, nor pleased. His gaze carried something different, something that Isabella couldn't immediately identify. The silence between the two prolonged, filled with tension that was difficult to ignore. Leonard didn't look away, studying every detail of her expression. He was waiting for something, for an explanation. Bluntly, his voice sounded firm but without aggression. He wanted to understand. I wanted to know why. Among all the women who participated in that competition, she was the only one who never tried to win him over, who never played like the others. The question hung in the air. Isabella pressed her fingers against the handle of the suitcase, looking away for a moment. She could simply continue without responding, but something inside her said that this moment needed to happen. He took a deep breath, and finally the truth that had been hidden for so long was about to be told. What really happened inside that mansion, and why did Isabella behave? Stay until the end to discover the secret that Isabella kept throughout the competition, and how a simple decision can change everything. You won't want to miss any details of this fascinating plot. To understand why Isabella never played the same game as the others, it was necessary to go back in time. The story didn't start there, in the hallway of that mansion. It all started much earlier, when a discreet but intriguing advertisement began to circulate among women looking for an opportunity to change their lives. An event promised something great, but few details were revealed. That competition was not like any other. There were no sponsors or known associations involved. The only confirmed information was who was behind everything: Leonard's mother. She was not just a rich woman. He was a figure of power, known not only for the financial empire he had built, but also for the influence he exerted over people and institutions. His name opened doors and closed paths, depending on his interests. For many, she was a cold and calculating woman, someone who did not accept a destiny different from the one she had planned. Everything he touched was meticulously controlled, and this event would be no different. His money financed grandiose projects, but never without a specific purpose. She didn't organize a simple contest. She created a game in which the rules were defined only by her, and whoever dared to challenge her authority would hardly get a second chance. Her announcement aroused the interest of many ambitious women, willing to do anything to get closer to that exclusive world. The invitation was aimed only at a select group of women, promising a unique opportunity that could transform their lives. No concrete information was released, just that it was a unique experience, something never seen before. What was known was that the selected participants would have to remain in the mansion for a few months, going through different phases until the finalists were chosen. The final prize was described as generous, but the criteria for achieving it remained a mystery. The lack of details increased the fascination surrounding the event, generating speculation about the true purpose of the competition. The application was simple, but the final selection was a puzzle. No explanation was given about the factors evaluated, and this only increased the desire to participate. Some women believed the criteria involved beauty and sophistication, while others were sure it was something much deeper. The mystery became an attraction in itself, a psychological game that made everyone wonder if they had the right profile to be chosen. After all, what was really expected of the participants? On the first day inside the mansion, expectations were high. The women had been led into a huge hall, where luxurious chairs were arranged in a circle. The mood seemed solemn, almost theatrical. Silent servants distributed sealed envelopes to each participant. When they opened it, they all found the same enigma, a sequence of numbers and symbols with no apparent meaning. There were no instructions, no warnings about what they should do. Some began to argue among themselves, trying to decipher a pattern, while others just watched. waiting for someone to take the initiative. Time passed, and without any warning, some women were called and taken out of the room. They never came back. What determined who stayed and who left? Nobody could say. The mystery hung in the air, leaving everyone uneasy. In the following days, new challenges were imposed, each one more unusual than the last. One morning, they were taken to a huge garden, where they had to choose between 3 paths. One led to a serene lake, another to a maze of rocks, and the third to a greenhouse of exotic flowers. Some decided to explore each option, while others hesitated, fearing that any wrong choice could result in elimination. It didn't take long for fear to spread. Some participants started to avoid risks, observing the steps of others before making any decision, but nothing was predictable. Some of those who took the risk were retained, while others, despite having proceeded cautiously, mysteriously disappeared from the competition. The unpredictability of the selections made everything even more distressing. The eliminations continued without explanation. In one of the most enigmatic tests, women were placed in front of huge mirrors, under intense lighting. Each person had to write something about themselves on a piece of paper, without knowing what the purpose of it would be. Some filled it with ambitious phrases, others wrote desires or fears. As soon as they were finished, the papers were collected and burned before their eyes. No justification was given, just another silent wait until new names were called and removed from the group. Gradually, the competition stopped seeming like an exciting event and began to take on the tones of a psychological experiment. What determined who continued? What was being evaluated? The organization's silence made everything more disturbing. During these enigmatic trials, most went out of their way to impress, actively participating and making sure they were being noticed. The fear of elimination increased the need to stand out. However, among them, there was one that did not demonstrate the same sense of urgency. Isabella went unnoticed, never being the first to act, but also not making mistakes that could put her at risk. She was not an obvious player, nor was she an eager competitor. His discreet posture did not attract attention, and this began to become a mystery in itself. While some participants tried hard to understand the rules of that game, Isabella seemed to just observe them. Their expressions never betrayed insecurity or despair, but neither did they show exaggerated interest. Isabella maintained a precise balance between acting and observing. She was never the first to speak out, but she also didn't wait until she was the last. He carefully evaluated the reactions of others, absorbing the behavior of the organization and the judges before making any decision. When he positioned himself, he did so naturally, without exaggeration or attempts to attract attention. While some competitors talked too much, eager to stand out, and others hesitated until the last second, Isabella found the exact moment to act. This behavior kept her safe, off the radar of those who saw the competition as a game of manipulation. But, contrary to what many might think, she was there to win. What differentiated her from others was that her motivation was not based on ambition or vanity. A greater need guided her, and any mistake could cost her dearly. Before continuing, I would like to hear from you. What would you do if you were in this competition without knowing what the rules were? Is the best strategy to act first or wait to understand the game? Leave your comment with your opinion and how you would deal with unpredictable challenges like these. The eliminations continued without an apparent pattern, and the uncertainty left many of the women increasingly tense. Some who had shown extreme confidence in the beginning were disappearing from the group, while others who had not done anything remarkable were still there. Isabella noticed this unpredictable rhythm and adapted to it effortlessly. If the challenge required initiative, she didn't rush in blindly, but she also didn't fall behind. If it involved reasoning, she waited for the right moment to speak, ensuring that she did not convey doubts, but without appearing too bold. This behavior made her an enigmatic piece in the game, a participant difficult to define. Some women began to observe her curiously, trying to understand if this was part of an elaborate strategy, or if it was just her discreet nature. His presence went unnoticed by the organization, but not by his competitors. There was something about her that didn't make sense. During one of the few interactions between the competitors, one of the participants, intrigued by her reserved posture, asked a question that many were already asking themselves in silence. What was she doing there if she didn't want to win? Isabella looked away, as if she hadn't heard, and changed the subject without responding. The discomfort only lasted for a moment, but it was enough for the other woman to realize that there was something behind that unspoken response. What no one knew was that for Isabella, winning was not a matter of choice, but of necessity. I was there because I couldn't lose. While some played out of ambition, she didn't have that option. Each movement needed to be calculated, and any slip could put everything in jeopardy. The competition had narrowed until only the finalists remained. The women who remained in the race were not there by chance. They had been filtered through enigmatic tests, unexpected eliminations, and a silent game where intelligence, appearance, and boldness were evaluated without anyone knowing exactly how. Each of them carried the conviction that they were just a few steps away from a great prize. The mystery surrounding the competition, which for months had kept everyone in a state of constant tension, finally seemed about to be solved. The main hall of the mansion was prepared impeccably. The soft lights, lavish arrangements, and solemn atmosphere indicated that something important was about to happen. The atmosphere suggested a decisive announcement, and everyone remained alert, waiting for something that could change their lives forever. Among them, discreetly positioned, was Isabella. He had gotten this far without needing to expose himself excessively. It remained imperceptible to the organizers, but increasingly intriguing to the other competitors, who began to realize that their presence was not a mere coincidence. Leonard's mother entered the room with the attitude of someone who had already won before the game was even over. He looked at the gathered women, observing each one as if he were sizing up his finest creation. Then, bluntly, he began to speak. His voice was calm, controlled, but the words that came out of his mouth made the ground seem to disappear beneath the finalists' feet. The competition was never about fame or money. The real prize was not a $1 million contract, a title, or a professional opportunity. The powerful woman before them was looking for an heir to her fortune, who would take over her empire in a peculiar way. The purpose of that event was to find someone who would give her a grandchild. The woman who became pregnant first would inherit his wealth and marry his son, Leonard. The impact of those words was immediate. The silence was broken by expressions of shock and disbelief. Some women stood still, trying to process what they had just heard. The whole time they believed they were competing for an extraordinary prize, but they had never considered that the ultimate goal would be that. Some felt outraged, deceived from day one. Others, with their minds still spinning, began to recalculate their options. What once seemed like a prestigious game now became a definitive contract, and not everyone was willing to move forward. Between exchanged looks and tense expressions, some decided that this was not the path they wanted, and left the room without looking back. The tension rose when the doors opened again. The sound of the wheels sliding across the polished floor was the only thing that could be heard. Leonard entered without haste, but his every movement seemed to weigh heavily on the air. His gaze swept over the finalists without showing emotion, but the stiffness on his face betrayed his discomfort. When the wheelchair became visible, reactions were inevitable. Some of the women, still trying to absorb the first revelation, found themselves faced with a detail they had not considered. The shock was instantaneous for some, who couldn't hide their surprise and lost any interest at that moment. The competitive spark they once carried disappeared, and in silence, some walked away. Others, however, saw it from a new angle. Some looked away but stayed, while a few smiled, realizing that the game might be easier than they imagined. If the only objective was to get pregnant, the difficulty seemed minimal. Leonard's mother watched everything with satisfaction, seeing the selection process complete before her eyes, without having to say anything else. The son, on the other hand, remained motionless, carrying in his eyes the revolt of someone who had already lost any control over his own life. Among all the women still there, some were indecisive. Others saw that situation as a gateway to a life of luxury. And there was Isabella. His face remained serene, his posture unchanged. She didn't show surprise, nor the discreet enthusiasm of someone who saw an advantage there. He just watched. Some participants began to look at her more closely. Did the discreet woman, who never seemed to rush into anything, already know what was going on? Would I have entered that contest knowing everything from the beginning? That lack of reaction began to bother the other finalists, who couldn't understand how someone could be so impenetrable. The competition took a new turn. Now that the rules were clear, the finalists no longer hesitated. What was once a silent dispute, shrouded in mystery and speculation, turned into an open battle for Leonard's attention. The atmosphere of the mansion has completely changed. Small meetings, planned conversations, and coldly calculated strategies became part of the routine. Some finalists took the more direct approach, seeking to impress him with exaggerated compliments and subtle touches, trying to create an instant connection. Others preferred a more subtle path, feigning disinterest just to arouse curiosity. The corridors of the mansion became a stage for strategic movements, where each woman tried, in her own way, to stand out without appearing desperate. Dinners became decisive moments. Some finalists positioned themselves next to Leonard whenever possible, ensuring that they were noticed. One of them started to show a sudden interest in art, discovering that it was one of her favorite pastimes. Another pretended to like the same books as him, trying to create affinities that didn't exist. There were those who used physical proximity as a weapon, bending down close to him to pick up something, smiling with looks full of ulterior motives. Conversations were planned with precision, gestures rehearsed. But despite all this effort, no one was able to get a concrete answer. Leonard remained impassive, distant, observing everything without getting involved. Among all the participants, Isabella remained the biggest mystery. His posture didn't change. He never took the initiative, nor did he try to create a moment of closeness. While the others moved with calculated precision, she remained unchanged, far from any dispute. With each new encounter, his discreet presence became more evident, and this did not go unnoticed. Leonard began to observe her from afar, intrigued by her apparent lack of interest. While the others competed for her attention, she seemed indifferent, as if she didn't need to prove anything. Now the tests took place under Leonard's watchful eyes. At that moment, he was not only being evaluated, but he was also beginning to evaluate those around him. And without Isabella realizing it, he wanted to understand why, in the midst of a competition designed to win him over, she was the only one who didn't try to do it. Isabella's silent presence began to bother the other finalists. While everyone was focused on getting Leonard's attention, ensuring looks, conversations, and shared moments, she remained away, without showing any rush or interest in joining the game. At first, her discreet stance was ignored, but as the eliminations continued and the group became smaller, her lack of initiative began to arouse distrust. If you didn't want to win, why were you still there? Some began to comment among themselves, trying to decipher their intentions. In a game where everyone was willing to do anything, no one could understand how anyone could remain without at least trying. The suspicion intensified when, at a time when everyone was busy trying to get closer to Leonard, Isabella discreetly walked away. In a secluded hallway, she pulled out a small phone she had hidden among her clothes and made a short call. The tone of his voice was low, tense, and his eyes moved from side to side, making sure no one was around. His words were direct and quick, as if he couldn't go on for too long. As soon as he finished, he put the device away again and took a deep breath, needing to compose himself before returning to the main hall. But she wasn't as alone as she thought. Leonard observed the scene from afar. His fixed gaze indicated more than curiosity. It was distrust. He started to wonder who Isabella really was. All the others were there out of interest, seeking a position at his side to conquer their family's fortune. But she doesn't. Now he was sure there was something more. The way he acted, the moments he chose to walk away, the way he never seemed surprised by events. Isabella didn't just look different. She was there for a reason no one knew. While the other women were playing the game of seduction, she seemed to be playing a completely different game, and Leonard needed to find out what it was. Time passed and the competition entered its most unpredictable phase. Some finalists, seeing that their efforts to win over Leonard were not having any effect, decided to resort to another method. They claimed to be pregnant, certain that this was the definitive way to guarantee victory. The tension in the mansion increased. Between looks of distrust and attempts to prove their allegations, the dispute reached a new level. Some women held their stories with conviction, while others seemed nervous, hoping the lie wouldn't be discovered. The announcement of these supposed pregnancies brought a dense silence, mainly because Leonard's mother did not react with the excitement that some had expected. She observed the women before her without expressing surprise. Instead of accepting the statements, he demanded immediate proof. The order was clear and unquestionable. One by one, the imposters were exposed. Some tried to maintain the farce until the end, but the siege was closing quickly. The game that previously involved charm and manipulation now revealed the desperation of some finalists who, realizing they had come too far, tried to justify themselves without success. Leonard's mother watched everything coldly. She was not a woman to be deceived, and this type of move would never work on her. At the end of the process, the plans fell apart, and one by one the candidates were expelled. When the last imposter walked out of the gates, the hall fell silent. Isabella looked around and noticed something unexpected. Without realizing it, she was the only one left. All the others had been eliminated, each through their own mistake. But the problem was that she never played to win. He never tried to get closer to Leonard. He was never part of the others' strategies. He stayed there just because he had to. But now, there was no one left. The competition was over and she was not the winner. With no reason to continue, he took a deep breath, lowered his head, and decided to leave. For her, that was the end. It had failed. Isabella walked towards the exit, feeling the weight of frustration on her shoulders. The halls of the mansion seemed even wider now that they were empty. The silence that was once filled with tension transformed into something different, heavier. Isabella walked quickly, holding her small suitcase tightly against her body. His steps were determined, but his irregular breathing betrayed the whirlwind of thoughts that passed through his mind. The game was over, and she had no reason to stay there anymore. She passed through each room, ignoring the luxurious details of the house that once housed so many women vying for a future she never wanted. The exit was close. All I had to do was cross that last corridor, and all that would be behind me. Before she could touch the handle of the large door, a sound behind her made her stop. He turned around at the same moment and found Leonard, who quickly got in front of him, blocking his exit. Her wheelchair was positioned in the middle of the path, an obstacle she could not ignore. He didn't seem angry, but he wasn't calm either. His gaze was deep, intense, filled with something that Isabella couldn't immediately decipher. Now he analyzed her, not as someone distant from the whole situation, but as an enigma that he needed to solve. Silence stretched between the two, almost as long as the one they had shared days ago, when everything was still in progress. Leonard didn't look away. I was there for a single question. Why didn't she ever try to deceive him like the others? His voice sounded firm but not aggressive. He really wanted to know. During all that time, they had all done everything to attract him, manipulate him, or at least stand out in some way. But Isabella never played that game. She never tried to be chosen, but she also never gave up. It just remained there, always in the shadow of the competition without showing its intentions. He needed to understand. Her silence was heavy, and for a moment it seemed like she wouldn't respond. But then Isabella looked away for a moment, took a deep breath, and with nothing left to hide, she finally told the truth. His motive was never the prize or the contest. His mother was seriously ill, and that money was his only chance to save her. She couldn't afford to take risks, nor could she afford to be eliminated before the right moment. He needed to stay until the end, and that's exactly what he did. But now, with the competition over, there was nothing more he could do. He had failed. Her gaze returned to Leonard, waiting for some reaction. But at that moment, he just watched her in silence, processing everything he had just heard. That answer changed everything. Leonard remained silent for a few moments, absorbing every word Isabella had just said. All the other women who went through that competition had a clear objective: status, money, power. But she doesn't. He never tried to win him over. He never took part in the game he despised. During all this time, he remained there not out of self-interest, but because he had no choice. The truth weighed more than any strategy he had ever witnessed inside. Her mother had reduced that event to a cold and calculating dispute, where feelings had no place, but Isabella was never on that board. Leonard didn't know if what he felt was anger at what his mother had done or respect for the only person who never tried to deceive him. He took a deep breath and made a decision. For the first time since the beginning of everything, he had the chance to act of his own free will without following the rules that had been imposed on him. He looked at Isabella, who still maintained a rigid posture, as if she was already prepared to receive a no, but he didn't hesitate. He said he would help his mother, that he would give her the money she so desperately needed, not out of pity, not out of debt, but because I wanted to do something right in the midst of it all. That way, someone inside that mansion would receive something without having to lie, without having to fight or humiliate themselves. Isabella would not need to play, nor submit to any conditions. She would simply receive what she needed. Leonard's mother watched everything from afar. His face was full of dissatisfaction, but he said nothing. This time his son had made a choice on his own, without considering his rules or demands. He didn't choose a winner. He didn't fulfill the purpose she had set out. Isabella picked up her suitcase again, but this time without the weight of defeat. He walked towards the exit, without looking back. Leonard followed her with his eyes until the moment the gates closed. She had been the only true person in that competition, and in the end, she was the only one who really deserved to win. Thank you for following this story until the end. Did you notice how each decision can completely change the course of a life? If you like intriguing stories full of twists, enjoy the final screen that appears now. Click to like the channel and don't miss any of these engaging narratives. In a few moments, a recommended video will appear for you, bringing another fascinating story that will hold your attention from start to finish. Soon after, you will see a collection of other similar stories to continue diving into exciting plots full of surprises. Just click on the screen and follow this journey full of mystery, emotion, and learning. See you in the next video, with more stories that will challenge your expectations and make you reflect.